What's up again, everybody? We've got a fun video today because today we're talking all things Levia? Levia? What's up,
Definitely
man,
Levia.
Sant? How's it going, man?
Oh, Steven, what a pleasure to be here. Thanks for doing this, spreading the word, spreading the gospel that is Levia, because she's a fantastic hero that I've had so much fun playing for now almost a full year. Can you believe it?
Today we're going to talk through your deck, your classic constructed Levia Road to Nationals winning deck. This deck you took, and I watched on stream, you took to a first place finish in the most recent Road to Nationals season, and it was absolutely exhilarating to watch. You put on a very dominant performance from everything that I watched, and the moment it was over, I was like, man, we need to sit down and talk through this deck, because it's one of those scenarios where you made it look so good and so easy that it's like, we have to talk more about it. So I'm really excited, as you mentioned, to have you on and talk through this Levia deck. First of all, you say Levia, I used to say Levia, but I've watched so many of your videos that now I just say Levia too.
That's hey, that's why I exist here. I'm just I'm speaking the mouth of James White here. That's how he says it. He says Levia, so I just follow suit. Not gonna tread on his toes. Tell you what.
By the way, before we get started too far into it, we should talk about the hero. By the way, I am totally using the young hero because this is the hero you cosplayed as, and so I figured it would be only fitting to use this hero. Also, it is a foil version, so I felt like I needed to get the extra little shine. I'm not as cool as you. I don't have a cold foil adult version of Levia. Look, you just have it in your hands.
You mean like this in a beautiful Man-Sant sleeve? That's what you're missing out on, Steven?
You're just flexing out, man. You're just flexing out. I love it. So I'm running this one, but walk us through the hero effect and why it actually matters, and I guess technically what you use it for, because that's kind of a big deal.
Right. So Levia has a very strange hero effect here in that it actually strictly manages a downside. It adds nothing beneficial to your play patterns here, but whenever you banish a 6 attack card from your graveyard, it's going to turn off the keyword Blood Debt from all the cards sitting in your banish zone. So Blood Debt, super popular keyword from, you can remember the chain deck that was out there winning all kinds of events. Levia also has that keyword, being a shadow hero, and she's going to accrue a lot of it in that banish zone, up to the point where it's threatening lethal all the time. So your ability to turn off that keyword, save yourself from taking the damage, is a big deal in playing your turns correctly and maintaining tempo and just not self-killing, because hey, self-killing, that sucks.
Really quickly, just kind of blast through the weapon and equipment, and then let's talk about the main portion of your deck, and then we'll talk about how you kind of came to Levia in the beginning, and then maybe why you built this deck the way it is, and we'll talk all about the cards, the sideboards. We'll go into the whole thing.
Beautiful. So then speed round on equipment. This is actually a Mandible Claw Blood Debt list. So I'm running the double Mandible Claws here, basically because they fill this amazing ability to push with Blood Rush Bellows, a card that's obviously really good in Rhinar, being a fellow brute. Levia can use the Blood Rush to pitch 2 blues into like a very cost-efficient attack at the end of these Mandible Claws. So that tends to be just a great resource sink for pushing a lot of damage. You don't use it every turn. It's not a very efficient weapon otherwise, but because you're so centric in being an aggressive deck, this is just, it's just an enabler for Blood Rush. It's very good.
And you do have Meat Axe in the equipment, like sideboard, if you will, the suite. What do you use Meat Axe for? When do you play that out?
Meat Axe is really just for Icelander. I'm still unsure whether I really want to take it into Kano as well, because Kano, you want your Blood Rushes to actually push a lot of damage, right? But against an Icelander in particular, you don't want to play Blood Rush. Blood Rush can just get stopped with Channel the Bleak Expanse if you're playing that, or just with an alarming amount of taxes anyway, making your ability to swing with multiple things just too expensive. So because of that, I was just running Meat Axe because there's a couple Icelanders in my area, and she's still relatively new, so people were experimenting. And yeah, just wanted safety net for that matchup.
Oh, it's super interesting. I would never have thought that was like the strict reason. Then you have 2 headpieces. You've got Crown of Providence, which is brand new, and Skullhorn as well. Talk about the use cases for both of those.
Well, Crown of Providence, Steven, is such an insane card for Levia. It might as well say Shadow Brute. It is the entire reason playing this like very aggressive Blood Debt, like highly volatile type of list even works right now, because this deck will run into myriad issues of drawing all reds or drawing no ways to turn off Blood Debt. But Crown of Providence solves that for that one point in the game that was so critical for you not to clunk up. My goodness, Crown of Providence is right there. It's a huge safety net card. And better than running something like Hope Merchant Stud like I was doing previously, it also blocks 2. And so this adds to that beautiful suite of equipment that lets you have just a huge amount of armor to pivot the game the way you want. And it fills the grave, which is actually quite good. It's not a 6, but even just throwing in some cards in graveyard to let you hit the 3 cards you need to play out some of your attacks, that's really good. So yeah, Crown, just fantastic. And of course, extra protection against Command and Conquer as well.
And that really speaks, I think you mentioned something in there that kind of triggered this for me. This really speaks to, I think, the skill level it takes to play this deck, because there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of management, things like Blood Debt, like you mentioned. And so if anyone, if like you're watching this and you're like, man, I want to pick up something that really just kind of flexes my brain a little bit, makes me really think and weigh a lot of things, a la like a wizard, I feel like this is actually a really good kind of deck for someone to pick up, or an archetype, or just a play style that might gravitate towards, right?
Oh yeah, 100% agree. I wouldn't say it goes as deep as potentially like Kano does, but there's a lot of management of zones, a lot of management of just like the tempo game winning turn cycles is very awkward in this deck, but yeah, hard to agree. For the Skullhorn here, this is just an Arcane Barrier 2-piece. So, you know, you're running it into Icelander. Once again, you're running it into Kano. You're not using it for that action effect because you don't get Intimidate off discarding. So there's really no reason to do that. It's just, yeah, Arcane Barrier 2. Feels good.
Yeah, makes sense. And then, of course, we have Carrion Husk. You're playing the card that I very humbly got to spoil, which was super awesome. This card's insane.
What can you say about this card? It's just, it's amazing. It's unlike in Chain, who could also play Carrion Husk. One of the beauties of this card in Levia is that you have the potential to never take that damage after you block with it, because this card has Blood Debt, right? You throw it on the combat chain, you block 6 with it, goes to the banish zone, and for Chain, this was a lose condition. Now you had something that you couldn't remove that was constantly ticking you down. But with Levia, if you're playing the deck well, everything's going the way you want, then you're turning off Blood Debt turn after turn, and this is just a huge tempo piece because of that. Block 6 on demand, and you don't have to worry about taking the damage after it. It's incredible.
Gambler's Gloves. Gambler's Gloves, a fantastic little piece from Crucible of War.
Gambler's Gloves, it doesn't fit what I like to do with the deck. I'm not a gambler, but Scabskins blocking 3, which we'll get to in a bit, is so huge for the deck that I do prefer to run it over like Hose the Shadow Beast. But when you run Scabskins, you need that extra protection with Gamblers. Otherwise, you pretty much should never roll that card. Because if you roll a 1 with Levia, you don't get to just say, okay, I'll just Arsenal pass. You say, oh, I take Blood Debt.
Yep.
And sometimes that kills you. So Gamblers is just protection against that, right?
And you do also have, like you mentioned, the Scabskin Leathers, which is a fantastic card for blocking. You can also use it for rolling, as you mentioned, to try and gain action points and do some crazy stuff.
Yeah, and there are points in the game where rolling is just strictly beneficial unless you roll like a 1 and 2 1, right? Because with Levia, we'll get to this in the deck, but just to mention it here, she has the ability to play cards out of her banish zone. So you can actually roll Scabskins in positions where you didn't keep extra cards hoping that Scabskins was going to give you an extra action point. The cards that you could play with it are actually already there in your banish zone. But I always run it because the 3 block itself is just so big. It adds that huge suite of armor.
As far as Null Rune is concerned, I think you fill out your Null Rune suite.
So actually, I was running Null Rune Robe was the other piece, and Null Rune Gloves. And Null Rune Gloves specifically is just for your late game against Viserai. Viserai is a really hard matchup. You tend to like maintain parity with life against a Viserai. It just comes down to those late game turns where he could just lethal you over like a slow trickle to death with keeping a blue to Runechant Rosetta. And he could do that, you know, from you being at like 3 life or so. Just block with 3, slowly kill you. Block with 3, slowly kill you. And I really hated getting those points in the game because there's nothing you can do about it. So I ran Null Rune Gloves just to make it so that Viserai can't go for that win con, and he has to try to close the game fairly. And that actually becomes quite hard for Viserai that needs to hold cards to deal more damage than just that trickle. So yeah, the Null Rune Gloves there actually really helped that matchup. And then the Null Rune Robe, which was the other piece, is just to fill out AB3 when you're running into Wizard. Just because Husk doesn't do anything.
Makes a ton of sense. So that's the equipment suite overall, and you're running a decent amount of equipment, but nothing crazy, which opens you up to play a lot of mainboard and sideboard cards. We'll start with the mainboard.
So I'm calling this iteration pretty much like 3.0. This entire Road to Nat season, I was iterating on this version of the deck, this very aggressive Blood Debt version. And I ended up with an 85% win rate, 17 wins, 3 losses across 3 RTNs. It was a really good run. Second place, first place. But every time I was iterating on the deck, tweaking it a little bit, and this is the build that finally got me to that win. And I really, really like how it's evened out here with the build. It's very consistent in pulling off these smaller hand combos, which are really strong for Levia because she's not a deck that uses 4 and 5 card hands really well. And actually, you don't want to build your deck to be really efficient at those amount of playing out those amount of cards per turn, because you need to be blocking, right? So if you build your deck to be centered around like 2 card, 3 card combos, it's a lot stronger for Levia in that you could have one of those pieces in arsenal, and that means you can block with 2 cards now, and that feels great because you need to maintain that graveyard fill, that importance of blocking and still throwing out your attacks.
So do you want to work from left to right?
Yeah, left to right.
Okay,
left to
cool.
right.
So
Sounds good.
let's grab the old Endless Maw and see if we can get this nice and in focus for everybody at home. So
I hope you all can see it because this card is juicy. This card is so good. It is one of the it's one of the best ways to demonstrate like what Levia is doing apart from other heroes, which is coming in for these smaller hand sizes at above rate trades. So if you think about this as being a 2-card hand where you pitch a blue and come in with Endless Maw, and you assume that the Endless Maw effect of banish 3, hitting a 6, gaining +3 attack goes through, then that makes this a 3-card or a 2-card hand for 9 damage, which is
super solid,
alarmingly above rate. Like that is
so
good. An aggro deck that's keeping 2 cards comes back for like 8 if they had like a 4 go again into like 4, right? So this is just a 2-card hand, easy peasy, coming in for 9.
Moving on to Dread Screamer, and I'll just do this. Dread Screamer, and then you pronounce it Graveling Growl. I'm not going to lie, I literally never pronounced it that way until I saw you do it, and I was like, well, duh, how else would I say it?
Right. I think, no joke, I was calling this Graveling Ghoul or something in the early days, just because I can't read either. But yes, it's a graveyard thing. So Graveling
Graveling, right? Yeah, makes total sense.
Makes sense.
So Dread Screamer obviously is insane. This card in general is just insane. Not just the art, but the actual effect is like really sick.
Right. So this combo is another demonstration here of her smaller hand sizes. So a 3-card hand, once again, assume you've got a blue, lets you play Dread Screamer, which comes in for this 2-cost, banish 3. If it hits a 6, go again. Coming in for 6. And then with that last resource floating off the blue, you whop them for 7 with Graveling Growl. Graveling Growl is one of the reasons to play into Blood Debt. This card has this condition where you can only play it if you banish a 6 this turn, but it's so above rate. A 1 for 7 is insane.
Talk to me about Unworldly Bellow and Swing Big, because this one's a fun one.
Right, so this is another 3-card combo in line of just the different ways Levia can present damage, because we saw a little bit of like what going wide looks like in Levia with Dread Screamer and Graveling. This is going tall. So this lets you, once again, off of a blue pitch, play Unworldly Bellow, banishing 3, doesn't care if it hits, giving +4 to this next Shadow or Brute attack, and then coming in with Swing Big, those last 2 floating resources, for 8. So plus the 4, right, that's 12 damage now off a 3-card hand, but really low effort for you to pull this off, because it doesn't even care about hitting 6 to get it done, right? So sometimes this is a great way to just clean your graveyard, because Unworldly Bellows will just eat some of the garbage that maybe you blocked with early game. Your blood debt's not really high. Maybe you don't have blood debt yet at all. So you're just clearing out that graveyard and then smashing them really big. Unworldly amounts of big for 12 damage.
Now these 2 cards are interesting because they combo with stuff that you said you have in the sideboard. Is that right?
Right. So I always put these in the main board because of the flexibility that they have in some of the cards we already saw, like the Unworldly Bellow preemptively with the cost curve of these, or maybe like with, at the end of a Scabskin's roll, like you get to come in with Graveling after, something like that. But you're always running these anyway because of the direct synergies they have with some of the sideboard cards we'll get to. But Writhing Beasthulk is just a 2-cost here. Banishes 3. If it hits a 6, it's going to gain Dominate. And that doesn't sound amazing for most of the game, but it does close games just out of nowhere. Because, hey, you get to the late game, your opponent's probably blocked with armor willy-nilly because they assume Levia has no hit effects, which is true. And then all of a sudden, they're at 3 life, you just smack them, Writhing Beasthulk, ends the game. Feels great. Yeah,
for sure. And then Hungering Slaughterbeast as well is in this little package that you're talking about.
Right. So it's about the cost curve. It's about filling this 2-cost attack role that works really well with our sideboard Howl from Beyond and Ghostly Visits. So this one doesn't have Dominate, but it is coming in for 7 attack. and it doesn't care about what it hits in the graveyard. It's just going to banish 3 as cost. So this can be like a relatively okay play, like early game, once again, like clearing out some extra graveyard space, because you don't care if it hits or not. And it just comes in for a bit above rate, 2 for 7. But you always got to remember, a lot of these cards, they exist in your deck because they all block 3 as well. So you look at a card like this, it's not that exciting. It has its time to be played, but you always got to remember it blocks 3. All this stuff blocks 3. So that's the flexibility of when you're crafting your hands. You get to decide, what combos am I building towards? Hungering isn't going to fit this turn. It's my block fodder.
Final combo piece, and this is one that you said is really the deck is built around, as we talked about with the claws, and that's Blood Rush Bellow.
Right. So with running the Bannable Clause, it's really all about this card really pushing the ceiling of your damage. Blood Rush Bellows is going to discard a card, right? Random card. Hopefully it's a 6. You'll never play it if you don't have a 6 in hand, quite honestly. Then it gives all your brute attacks +2 this turn, which counts your Mandible Claws, and it also is going to turn on their go again because you've now discarded a 6. You also then draw 2. And the beauty here is that it costs 1, right? So if we talk about the cost curves, about using your blues efficiently, what you can start to look at with Blood Rush is this beautiful curve of Blood Rush with a blue. That's going to leave you with 2 floating. Then that pays immediately for your first claw. You pitch another blue to pay for your second claw. You have 1 floating. And with that 1 floating, you play one of the other cards that you're holding here, Boneyard Marauder. So with that cost curve we're talking about with Blood Rush, this is an all-star, because what it lets you do is play out an 18 damage turn, and with that second card you drew off Blood Rush, you now get to just reset your arsenal with it. So one of the priorities I have in this deck is always to arsenal a Boneyard Marauder, because it's what just turns on your best power card from the get-go. You have a Boneyard in arsenal, you see a blue, a Blood Rush, and a 6 in hand, you go ahead, chump something for a block, and you're almost guaranteed to just have an 18 damage turn and reset arsenal. It's so big for the deck. And the other beauty of having Boneyard Marauder always sitting in arsenal is that if you drew all reds, don't freak out. It doesn't have to be a crown turn. You can still block with 3 if you want, and just pitch something to play out the Boneyard, turn off Blood Debt, still swing 6. It's not terrible, but hey, like it's just a safety net card in that regard, or your huge enabler with Blood Rush. So honestly, Boneyard, insanely good card for the deck.
Why did you want Beast Within grouped in with this specifically?
Right. Well, Beast Within, it really only does 2 things for the deck. And number 1, it's just blocking fodder, blocks for 3. So that's always great. But then its huge use case is when you have it alongside Blood Rush. Because of course, if you discard this with Blood Rush, and you're going to craft it in a way where it's the only card to discard, right? You'll block with that other card, pitch your blue, Blood Rush, discard Beast Within. Beast Within does on that turn is not only draw you an extra card, but it also turns off Blood Debt. Because the way that this card reads is that it's going to banish the top card of your deck. You're going to lose a life. If it's a 6, add to hand. If not, repeat. But the key word here is that it's going to banish that card first. Then it goes to your hand. So when you get that combo off, and it really doesn't happen every game, right? But maybe you have a Blood Rush in arsenal, and you get to that point where, oh, I drew a Beast Within hand. You have a blue. You block with the other 2 cards, and then you are just set to go with Beast Within, Blood Rush, that blue, because now you're drawing 3 cards and your Blood Debt's already turned off. So you can even kind of luck sack into stronger attacks like a Swing Big at the end, or even a Graveling Growl at the end, because now you've satisfied the banish condition as well. So Beast Within, huge when you get it to line up on those turns, but in every other situation, like I said, it still just blocks 3.
So these are all the combos that you kind of wanted to highlight in this main board, and this is the rest of the main board. So let me go ahead and kind of rifle these out, and we can talk through them as we go. Art of War is an interesting addition. It's one that's like good just in general, right?
So Art of War is a bit contentious within the Levia community. Some people don't like it, some people love it. I'm in the camp that absolutely loves this card in Classic Constructed. I definitely think the non-block comes up a lot in Blitz, so you don't look at it there. But in Classic Constructed, what this card does for you is it's this enabler card for not only your Graveling Growls by just getting to, when you choose modes here, banish a card to draw 2, and normally go again. Tends to be the 2 modes you choose. When you banish that card, you're not only satisfying Blood Debt for the turn with Levi's ability, but now you're turning on something like Graveling Growl, which can always come up. But what it can also do for your deck here is let you play really aggressively when your graveyard is low. Because one of the things that can happen in a Levia deck, even when you're playing really aggressively, is you just run out of cards in your graveyard. Let's say you're stuck at like 1 card in your graveyard. When that happens, an aggro deck can see that and say, hold up a second, if I just take an off turn and I just full block what Levi's doing and set up an arsenal, then they're going to lose this turn cycle because they're going to take damage. But
Yeah.
Art of War says, forget that. Because now if your opponent's tried to like mega mine this turn cycle, you get to now say, well, no, I'm going to Art of War, turn off Blood Debt forcefully. Doesn't matter what my graveyard looks like. I'm going to draw deeper and maybe throw things now like Swing Big and a Graveling that don't care about your graveyard anyway. Or maybe the Art of War filling the graveyard is that third card you needed to now play your turn out like you wanted anyway. So I really like Art of War. I think it's a card that lets you kind of get ahead of how your opponent's trying to play around Levia. And the other main thing it really does is interacts with your sideboard cards really well, because that banish effect, banishing a card, can actually work really well with some of the sideboard cards like Deeper Evil and Ghostly Visit, because in those scenarios, it's basically like gaining an intellect, because you banish a card you wanted to banish anyway.
From this point, we do have a lot of different blues, and then I put some ancillary cards here in the back that I know we're going to talk about because some of them are very interesting. But really quickly, I think most of these, you tell me, are blues for resources as well as for some like slight other benefits, right?
Sure. Yeah. So the blue base on Levia is interesting because she's a deck that really wants the blues to be her cost curve. Everything's built around having a blue, not a yellow, which is why you saw the yellows are only Blood Rush and Beast Within and Art of War, right? They're the Majestics. You can't help it anyway. But when you look at the blue base, what you're trying to build for is to fill multiple roles that Levia needs anyway. So you're either going to have cards like the Unworldly Bellow here that are just additional ways to turn off Blood Debt, which feel really great, and they still block 3. That's what the Unworldly is doing here. It's not a great buff to actually play out, but because it is a blue that you need in your deck anyway, you might as well have it fill those other roles, right? So that's what Unworldly Bellow does.
So I think this is a fun one because I actually, when I first started like playing Levia when she came out, I actually really loved this card.
Right, and the blue is, honestly, this card just giving Dominate the +1 is like not even what's relevant about it. It's just this ability now to pay 2, banish 3. It does care about hitting though, but if it does, you can put +1 and Dominate on your next attack, and that's any attack, just FYI, not weapon, but any attack, so it can in theory apply to like Command and Conquer or something. What this card does is once again just give you ways to end the game if it goes really late. And then we've got Dread Screamer. So in the blues, right, this is once again just a card that's turning off Blood Debt, but it's still functioning as a way to maybe play even a little bit aggressively with the blue, because it's turning off Blood Debt, right? It's coming in for that 2 cost for 4 and enabling. We have Deadwood Rumbler, and this card, while you can play it out if you really want to early game for this ability to, once again, 2-card hand coming in for 6, drawing, discarding a card. If you discarded a 6, you can banish a card from a graveyard. And the cool thing about this effect is it's any graveyard. And you don't even have to choose until after the resolution of the effect. You know, it's just flexibility. This card's really good, and because it's a base 6, that means it has synergies with your Art of War, has synergies with your Blood Rush, just in banish or discard targets. And if it ever ends up in graveyard, then once again, it's a 6 to banish and turn off.
Wrecker Rom, now this is a good card too. Yeah,
well, speaking of, you know, these blue 6s that block, here's that in a nutshell. It's really not doing anything else for the deck. It's just a utility role. For Art of War, for Blood Rush, it blocks. You can play it like turn 1 just to get extra graveyard fill because it does discard a card. So that's kind of cool, but I would never play it otherwise. It's just utility blue. Delicious card. Levia loves this one. I love this one. So Doomsday is almost a win con in and of itself, and really keen opponents are going to know that Doomsday is inevitable, which is kind of fun. You know, how thematic is that? And this is one of the main reasons to run Gambler's Gloves, right? Is because when you come up to this card, Doomsday, and you get to cast it, you gotta have 6 cards with Blood Debt in your Banner Stone. You get to play this out, summon Blasmafet. It's this amazing token that lets you swing for 6 for no cost. It's just an action point. There's no like pitch effect attached to it. And it lets you banish a card from your hand, a shadow card, which can then turn off Blood Debt, right? So against aggressive decks, what this means is when you summon out Blasmafet, if they decide to not kill him, because he has 6 life, it regenerates like all the allies do that we're now used to with Dromai. But if they don't kill him, that lets you now have this turn cycle where you block with 3 cards. You keep 1 card, you swing Blasmafet, and you banish that card. So you've now swung 6, blocked 9, 15 damage turn cycle off 4 cards, inevitably. That is so insanely good. Absolutely love this card. Really, really good.
Super, super fun. One of the most interesting things recently, and I know you've already talked about this on your own personal channel, which, by the way, everyone should go check out. Like, I don't know why you're not already. If you're not already on Manstant's channel and, like, watching his stuff, like, you should do that because it's just really good, and he makes great content. But you've talked about trade-in. I want you to talk to us why trade-in, because this is probably the most out of place of all the cards, and yet I think it's just so cool.
It's a really odd card, and I was running it in red until I realized the reason I like it is just the utility. And when you start looking at where to fit utility into a deck, you look at the blues, right? If it's not a card you're playing for its aggressive value, then it should probably be a blue. Yep. And, excuse me, trade-in is exactly that card. So what it's doing is, once again, acting as a safety net. If there's ever a chance where you get to just toss it in Arsenal, which you should probably do over blocking, because this is the one card in your deck that blocks 2. If you ever get to Arsenal this card, then it is just a safety net whenever you have like Beast Within coming up and don't have a Blood Rush. This lets you now play out Trade-In, discard Beast Within, turn off Blood Debt, and draw 2, and turn on your Mandible Claws. That's pretty insane in and of itself. That's like the best case, right? But even in any other scenario, just the ability to play out this little ping for 1, discard a 6, which is going to fill your graveyard a little bit, draw a new card, now turn on your Mandible Claws. Maybe you had an all dead hand that like didn't have enough resource cards, so you traded in 1 red to try to draw like, you know, a yellow or blue to get your turn rolling. I mean, there's just a lot this card can do. I'm not gonna say it does something in every game because it's very, very situational, but just because it has those use cases, I really, really like it. And then it's also an attack in your blue slot, which means Art of War can banish it just to draw 2. Soul Harvest is mostly a 6 attack, block 3 blue, right? It's filling that same role that like Wrecker Romp is. But it has this ability to be played if you really, really want to. Fortunately, it's a one of because it's a Levi's Legendary Specialization. But you get to pay 6, which hopefully you're doing off of just 2 blues, right? So pretend this is a 3-card hand. You pitch in 2 blues, you come in with Soul Harvest, you banish 6 cards from your graveyard. It's going to gain +1 for each Blood Debt card banished this way. Then, in theory, it could come in for a 3-card hand for 12, which is pretty good. But that's only if you banish strictly Blood Debt cards, which is almost never what this card's actually doing. What it can do, if you ever actually play it out, is probably against like control decks. You're going to play it out to just clean your graveyard if your graveyard was a bit sloppy. The beauty of it is that you can banish things like Howl from Beyonds and Blue Dread Screamers, and those are still Blood Debt cards, even though they're not 6s, to still count towards the attack buff. So I really wouldn't say you play this card a lot. It's just there for this, you know, fringe use case of cleaning graveyard and the fact that it's a 6. Block 3.
Hey, why 1 copy of Reckless Swing?
Well, the 1 copy is basically just so you have it. If you just have it in your list, it's doing something. Whether you pitched early and now your opponent sees, holy moly, he might be running 3 of these because he's a madman on Levia. And if that's the case, then they're going to be scared of getting 2 life throughout the entire game. But even just having like the 1 against a control deck still means you'll probably see it in like second cycle if you found it early, and that's still scary. Because then it can get to a point where control just never gets to swing into you at all, which is pretty cool.
So that makes up your main board as you describe it. And you said it was what, 53 cards? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's 53 for this version here.
And so you basically have these combos that you kind of try to play for. Just the combo idea is how you built this deck. And of course with Blood Rush, as you said, being sort of that linchpin thing that you can play for and push big damage. And then you have like your supporting blue resource cards as well as things like Art of War and like Blood Rush like we talked about, right? So this is your main board. And now let's go ahead and dive into your sideboard and talk about the matchups and how they kind of play out and when you'd bring certain cards in and possibly certain cards out as well. Okay, so this is your sideboard and we kind of put these in some columns. Why don't you talk us through maybe this top portion of the sideboard and describe to me like when you're bringing these in, what role perhaps like they serve as you bring them in, and just general like your philosophy on sideboarding.
Right, so the way I normally think about sideboarding is I discount the equipment, and this build there's 10 equipment. So you're looking at a 70 card main board, and then I just take out, you know, that X amount of cards, in this case 10, that I don't want to help me pursue my win condition. So I'm always staying at a lean 60, but in this build to try to like, you know, help everyone follow along a little bit better, we've gone ahead, made it a 53 card main board, and then we're just gonna look at kind of these packages of 7 to fill out what we're doing with, or what we're working with here. So in this top column, the 7 cards that you'll look to add would be kind of your anti-aggro package. So when you're against stuff like Fi, when you're against like the Rangers, against your warriors, things like this, anything that can play aggressively into you, you're going to take the ghostly visits.
Okay.
And the ghostly visits are in there because they're adding in this ability to basically +1 intellect off of your Art of War, which in a tight aggressive matchup is really, really strong. Just to basically gain +1 intellect, come in for free for 4, right? The other thing they're adding in there is this ability now to play those Hungering Slaughter Beasts and Writhing Beast Hulks that we mentioned in the main board to potentially get off a free 4 damage with Ghostly on the same turn you play those out. I really like Ghostly for that. Just make those aggro games even tighter for your opponent. And then you'll take one of these other cards, either the Command and Conquer or the Erase Face. So they have their different use cases. Obviously, like Command and Conquer is better into the Rangers. You're going to threaten their arsenal. It's better into like Briar because Erase Face isn't as applicable. And what this does is just give you a little bit more of early game plays because you don't necessarily get to play really aggressive with Levia from the get-go. But adding these cards lets you do at least something on like turn 1 and 2, which can be really important. That's really why you play it. Of course, it also blocks 3 and it's a 6. So
so you
take those in the matchups.
3, and you bring in the Ghostly Visit, and then what as your 7th card? Is it Shadow Puppetry every single time? Okay.
Yep, 7th card is the single Shadow Puppetry because this is just that extra way to just force the Ghostly out. Maybe it's after your gamblers, or maybe just drew into the ability to like not even really be under a lot of pressure to block, and you just keep the larger hand and play out Shadow Puppetry anyway. So it's good enough with Ghostly in the list as a little recursion piece, but it's also really strong alongside the hit effect card you're bringing in, whether it be Command and Conquer or Erase Face, because this +1 applies to any attack. Any attack action card. So not your weapons, but like your Erase Face or your Command and Conquer is now coming in for 7, which is a beautiful breakpoint, and it's threatening to turn off Blood Debt with this effect of looking at the top of your card, top of your deck, and potentially banishing it, and it gives it go again. So you can just force one of these hit effect cards to be the starter of a really big turn, and these are hit effects that you want to play it on. So it means your opponent is normally interacting with you on that turn, and your turn's not over because that card has go again now. But I only run it as a 1 of because it does block 2. And it is only for specific use cases, really, in these hit effect attacks you're bringing in and the Ghostly. So it doesn't apply beautifully to like anything else in your deck. The pitch curve of your deck is already working in the way it wants to, but it accentuates a little bit of like, the sideboard package you're bringing in. So that's why it's part of this whole deal.
It's a solid card, right? I mean, it just does what you want it to do for these exact cards. So speaking of Erase Face, I know I skipped over that one, but if you don't bring in Command and Conquer because you want this on hit effect, what are you bringing this in for specifically?
Right. So in the Patreon guide itself is actually written out for every hero. Erase Face is, obviously for the heroes that are going to care about the loss of their talent more than anything. So Dash comes to mind, Phi comes to mind, right? They need to be Mechanologists, they need to be Draconic Ninja. And when this hits, that really punts these aggressive decks turns. And that's a big deal in some matchups, right? It's not as generically good, but that's why you have Command and Conquer or Erase Face. You pick the one that's better for that role against
aggressive fuse effects too. Like, so if your opponent's trying to fuse anything in any deck, the card has lost its talent type, so you can't use it to fuse, right?
Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean you take this into anything, right? The reason it's against the aggressive decks is because the aggressive decks don't want to block, and therefore, even though it's only 6 attack, it is more relevant. Because if you're taking this against slower stuff, like, Prism or Guardian or whatever, blocking 6 is really easy for them. So that's why it's specifically anti-aggro stuff and not just like part of the main board itself. Yeah,
so that's the top row, and you said you bring that in for like aggro matchups, Okay.
Yep.
And then we have what I think is a really, really cool package on the bottom here that includes like Howl from Beyond, Shadow of Blasmaphet, Deep-Rooted Evil. And you bring this in for what specifically?
Right, so as we've got it laid out here, that's specifically like my anti-control board, but there's different ways to like play it. It can be anti-control for like Guardian specifically. You can tweak it a bit into like Illusionist. But the beauty of adding these cards to the deck is it just turns off the ability for your opponent to pretend that blocking you out wins them the game. Because there's a lot of people out there who just say Levia is garbage because you can just block her out and she just dies. Because what you do is bring in recursion pieces like Howl from Beyond, which you got in hand here. Amazing, amazing card. This card you get to play out of your banish zone for just 2 resources. It then goes to grave and is going to give your next attack +3. The reason you run 2 of them is because this fits an amazing cost curve of those 2 cost attacks that we saw in Hungering Slaughter Beast and Writhing Beastalk. So now off of one of those attacks plus 2 blues, you get to play Howl into one of those attacks. That's 6 resources total, right? Or 13 or 12 damage Dominate.
Yep.
That is so massive against decks that are just trying to block you out, because you've now controlled the graveyard to the T. It's exactly how you want to do it. You've filled your graveyard with these 2 Howls. You've cleared them out with this attack. The last card now in your graveyard is this attack. What do you do next turn? You play the 2 Howls back. Your graveyard's now at 3. You play your next attack. It clears. Attacks left over. You play the Howls again. It's just this, like, in theory, loop, which you get to play out for as many of these Banish 3 attacks as you have. It's so strong.
Shadow of Blasmafet, how does this function for you?
Well, this card is not a card I like to run. In fact, I actively try to like not put this in my deck list, but in this current metagame where there was a lot of slow decks out there, the Guardians, namely Oldhim, even Dromai now, and Prism that can play really control heavy, Shadow Blasphephet is just a way to accelerate those recursion pieces of Howl from Beyond, and then Deep-Rooted Evil, which is coming next, out of your deck. And it is a bit left up to chance, because what this card does is draw a card, then discard a card. If you hit a 6, then you get to banish a Blood Debt card from your deck. So in theory, it can miss, and so you don't really want to make this your reliable way of turning off Blood Debt for the turn. But if you're playing it early game, then it's like +1 intellect. It's pulling out these cards that you didn't really want to see drawn up anyway out of your deck right into the Banish Zone where they're instantly playable. This card is like really not amazing, right? It doesn't block. So if you pull out like your first recursion piece, find your second one naturally, and then you've only got like 2 Shadow Blasphepets left in the deck, you might as well play your second one to banish the third one. Just get them out at that point. Because their window to be really good is only like turns 1 through 4 maybe against like a really slow deck before you've ramped into Blood Debt anyway. Yeah, and then Deep-Rooted Evil as the last piece of this recursion puzzle. This one is not amazing by any stretch. It is 3 cost, so it doesn't innately fit into like a synergistic turn, right? It costs a blue in and of itself to play. But if you banished a 6 cost or more this turn, you can go ahead and play Deep-Rooted Evil out of your Banish Zone to come in for 6. And this has its uses. Really, the main reason to run it is because it's just decent damage and a way to refill your yard with a 6 that doesn't cost you a true card from deck. So while it's not amazing by any means, if you have a go again anyway off the back of like a Dread Screamer or an Art of War or something like that, you might as well be pitching in to Deep-Rooted to just get it out, get it recurring, and saving more reds in your deck.
Makes sense. And then you have exactly 1 copy of Energy Potion. What is the Energy Potion for specifically?
Well, Energy Potion is because Bravo, like OG Bravo, kind of had a resurgence recently because of how good Fi was, and you need an Energy Potion in your list or you will not win that matchup. The matchup is quite tough for Levia, so the basic like way to play around how you lose that match, because they'll just play very defensive, they'll block you out, try to make it hard for you to fill your graveyard proactively. So you've got to be digging in for your recursion pieces. You have to play into Blood Debt. You have to play that way. But then they conserve all this HP to return a Crippling Crush plus Pummel to try to just wipe you out, negate your ability to turn off Blood Debt, and then have you just take that damage plus take all your Blood Debt damage and basically instantly lose the game. Miserable. It's a horrible way to lose. But the way you beat that is by just having an Energy Potion in play. If your Energy Potion's out, then all you have to do is sit on some way to turn off Blood Debt in Arsenal, and then you can just crack Epot, play that card out of Arsenal. Doesn't matter what cards they took from your hand, because now you've swung back with something and you've turned off Blood Debt.
I love that. This is a fantastic sideboard, and I love the breakdown that you gave for this and the main board as well. You wrote an entire guide, like a written guide to this deck, and I mean, who could write it better than you, right? Because you've piloted the deck often. Like, this is your hero. This is exactly what you do, and you've written this entire thing out, including like a sideboard and matchups as well, right?
Yeah, I tried to go pretty in depth with it. I normally ramble quite a bit, so to put things like on paper for once, hopefully it was beneficial to everyone, because now it exists. It's out there. It's on your Patreon. And
for sure.
Maybe converts some other people to playing Levia full time, which, hey, we'll take you. We'll take you over at the Legal Levia Discord for sure.
For sure. Man, thank you so much for hopping on and for putting this list together and talking us through it, and then for writing the deck guide. If you want access to this deck list, and the write-up that you did. It's on this Patreon, so go down in the link in the description. YouTube.com/DMArmada is where you're watching this, and then Patreon.com/DMArmada is where you have access to that. And then if you want like even more deep dives, you want to watch this deck get played, you want to watch him win the RTN like I did on stream, head over to YouTube.com. I think it's /Mansant, isn't it?
I think it might be Mansant FAB.
Oh,
I think it's Mansant FAB.
Go check out his content. It's fantastic. He's one of the best to do it, period, end of story. And I'm super thankful that you hopped on with me and, talked all the way through it.
Oh, my pleasure, Steven. You have an amazing channel yourself. I love tuning into your stuff. And how's the real? I'm actually here pretty much only a year since I started playing. So it's almost Levia's anniversary herself, I think. She came out about a year ago, so how fitting.
Yeah, that's very true. That's a really, really good point. Well, if you enjoyed this video, do the thing that people say on YouTube to do, make numbers go places, and as always, thanks for watching.